Welcome everyone. Nice to be with you again. So if you are currently having a human experience, you're a human being at the moment, then your ancestors, the vast majority of your ancestors and mine, as far as we have recorded human history, thought that they were living in a universe with other highly intelligent forms of life. You might say other species of life. Now this may be like gods and goddesses with a small g, angels, fae, the Tuatha De Danann, the nature spirits. I was reading that book about Black Elk, the Lakota shaman. He talks about the Great Spirit, which is something like God with a large G, with a capital G. But then he speaks about all other sorts of spirits, the sky spirit, the mountain spirit, different sorts of higher living beings. So in Kashmir you have Nagas. Actually in the Sanskrit literature of South Asia, you have whole different delineations, Vidyadharas, Charanas, Rakshasas, Yakshas, Guyakas, Kinnaras, all sorts of other highly intelligent species of life. In the modern world, perhaps there's some overlap with our ideas about aliens or UFOs. Some of you may know recently the US government proceeding, after the Belgian government and French government have released documents where they say, from the governmental point of view, we know these things to be true, that there are such things like UFOs, we have visitors, we don't know who they are, we call them aliens or something. So whatever the nomenclature, the different cultures throughout history, this has been a predominant idea for the vast majority of human beings since time immemorial, we might say, since we have recorded history. It's a very interesting phenomenon. The most obvious immediate reason would be, how is it that vastly different cultures on at least 6 continents through large spans of time, multiple millennia, are all coming to approximately the same conclusion, that this universe is filled with other highly intelligent forms of life, some of them superior to human. Why would everyone do that? Now, one modern psychological or anthropological idea is to say, well, it's just something in human psychology. And I'll give you an example of something I heard in a philosophy class at university. It was something like, this is going back a few years, but it was something like the ancient Greeks, we were talking about Socrates, the ancient Greeks saw volcanoes and hurricanes and thunder and lightning and earthquakes, and they felt very fearful and powerless and vulnerable when experiencing these sort of natural, powerful events, and therefore they imagined that perhaps there's gods and goddesses behind these natural forces, and that in order to get control over these natural forces, they could propitiate or make some offering to these imagined gods and goddesses, and that in that way they could get some control, some greater control over their environment. In other words, there's been an attempt in the last century to sort of reduce all of this to a psychological phenomenon that all human beings share. Is that fair? Is that evidence-based? It's not evidence-based for sure, but it's is it true? To me, it strikes me as just sort of a counter-belief. Most human beings in recorded human history have believed that there are higher living beings in the universe. I believe that we live in a universe that doesn't have other intelligent life forms. It's sort of, I believe this, they believe that kind of thing. Belief. So from the epistemological perspective, from the scientific perspective, that's not going to get us anywhere. In other words, somebody says, I believe this, somebody else says, I believe that. Can't get to science that way. So I thought of a little thought exercise, a little sort of thought experiment that we could do today to maybe, shed a little light here and sort of explore this issue from a purely philosophical perspective, so not based upon an intuitive belief one way or another. I do think it's a bit lazy thinking for us in the modern world to say, hey, almost all of our ancestors throughout recorded history and most human beings living today think this to be true. Nope, it's just imagination. That seems to me to be, firstly, it's certainly unscientific. It's also kind of rude in the sense that we're not listening. We're not, when you have a relationship, it's good to listen to the other person and not make a priori judgments. So when all of our ancestors are, with a few exceptions, but most of our ancestors are telling us something, and then we respond with, no, you're all wrong, throw it in the mythology basket, that may not be the most scientific approach, because after all, our counter-belief may be mistaken. Best, when we're looking at some body of evidence or data, to approach it in a neutral way, objective way, and try to find the ways and means by which we could actually explore it philosophically, through experimentation, etc. So anyway, let's get to this little thought exercise. And this gets us into the world, the branch of philosophy called Ontology. And in the ancient Sanskrit tradition, that is the ancient idea of Sankhya. So Sankhya in the ancient yoga tradition and Ontology in the modern Western tradition or in the Western philosophical tradition, these are basically attempts to get at the same thing. What really exists here fundamentally, and how can we categorize it or analyze it? This kind of idea. So when we look around this world, we find that we can categorize everything that we see basically into two categories. One category being inanimate matter, and the other category being biological organisms. So you might say the bodies of living beings and inanimate matter. And if you look around, what else is there, really? So here's some examples of inanimate matter, just everyday, inanimate matter. And here's some examples of biological organisms, the bodies of living beings. And if we sort of put them side by side, they have quite distinct characteristics. Now, what then, or which category then, would we place the earth in? I've done this previously in live classes, and the general reaction is people intuitively think the earth to be a biological organism when they're thinking about the earth from this ontological perspective. And I used to give examples like if I cut my skin, there's blood. And if we cut the earth's crust, there's red hot lava. Or there's the idea of prana, the breath of life, so to speak. So you see so many higher living beings are breathing, having some exchange, some chemical reaction, or perhaps even more subtle reaction with the atmosphere in such a way that it maintains life in the body. And when the breath stops, the life stops, that kind of idea. And then we see with the earth, there are reactions going on which keep life flourishing. And then of course we have so much fluid in our body, veins and arteries and the whole all the lymph vessels which are moving lymph through the body, cleaning the cells and so on. So we have all this, these channels of moving fluid through the body in cyclical ways. And of course the earth also does. As we analyze the earth, in many ways the analogy fits. So would I call that proof? I wouldn't, but it's certainly very intriguing. Because what if the earth is actually, as the ancient people thought, as most people have thought throughout history, is a living being, is the body of, perhaps we might say, a goddess, Gaia or Terra or Bhumi, or like this, Prithvi, different names in the ancient world for the Earth Mother. So if she is, so we're doing a logical argument now, and we're starting with our theory. If she is, if the earth is the body of a living being who lives for billions of years and sort of exists on a higher order than what we are experiencing, in the same way that we have so many bacteria and trillions actually of different sort of mites and bacteria and microbes, all sorts of living things are on and in our bodies. And so we see that with her, but in a scaled up version, several orders of magnitude higher. Is she a higher living being? And if so, could we, as the ancients reveal to us, have some sort of relationship with her, almost like children to mother? You hear that, Mother Earth. Because, for example, our bodies come from our mother's body in the individual sense, and in the greater sense, all the living bodies on the earth, the mammals and the reptiles and the birds and so on, are coming, or our bodies are made of a transformation of her body. And she is supporting our life, much like the mother may support the life of the infant, or so on, in our sort of dimension of reality. I don't see anything in our presentation here so far that is necessarily illogical or unreasonable. It seems to flow fairly well from my perspective. And perhaps in the ancient world, or perhaps in other places in the world today, people still think like that. And perhaps they're right. In any case, I hope you found this, this talk interesting. Thank you for spending a little bit of time with me. And I'll see you next week. Thank you.